Good evening. It is January 14th of 2025. Recently in my church and amongst some of my friends, I was talking about starting like a online area of discussion, and I kind of made people laugh because I was trying to show my character, and I tend to feel very strongly about what I believe, and I've always been like that, and I present it that way. And so I said, well, if I was to call it something, I'd probably call it Why I'm Right. And so it made a lot of people laugh. And I said, it'd be a place where you can bring evidence, to try to dissuade me from my positions. And I will consider it. I will look at the evidence and discuss with you, things about those, matters, whatever you bring up. But I obviously wanted to control the conversation, bring it in the direction that I think would be helpful to people. And so maybe we can call this the first one of those. I don't know. But so the first subject I want to tackle today is something that I actually wrote about in my third book, which was a whole chapter on it, which was called, and one of the three questions I tried to answer in the chapter was John Wesley a premillennialist? Premillennialism is a view of end times where you believe the second coming takes place before a literal millennial reign of Christ here on this earth. Okay. And I can't go on into the particulars of end times and categorize John Wesley that way until we first establish where he stood as a whole. There is such a vast opinion amongst scholars today about where John Wesley stood on eschatology. Okay. And so I'm going to make a whole nother video on that subject in a short while. Okay. But this one, I want to bring up the basic statement that all scholars for years, as I've been reading on John Wesley, they usually introduce the subject the same way. And they always say, who was the primary influence on John Wesley when it came to end times? And they would all be in agreement that it was Johann Bengel, the German pietist commentator, who wrote on end times in the lifetime of John Wesley. Okay. And Wesley gives credit to him more than anybody else. So you have to consider it's an important question. Okay. And so the point that I want to bring up today, that obviously will be a disputed point, but I think it's vital to figuring out where John Wesley stood on end times, is to find out where John Bengel, stood on the issue of eschatology. Okay, if you were to bring out a source, say from Mark K. Olson, he's a professor today and that cares a lot to talk about this, and he's convinced. And honestly, guys, you're not going to find a person who doesn't have a view. I read it in one of my recent sources that I read, that it's funny how John Wesley can be brought over to anybody's view. It depends on what view they have of end times, and all of a sudden John Wesley has that view. Okay, and there's some truth behind that statement. Okay, we all have a position. We all have looked at the evidence, and we're trying to prove where we stand. Okay, and I'm no different, and I'm just going to be straight up with you. That's why I called this Why I'm Right, because I don't fear the idea of debating the issue and bringing information in front of you to show you why I believe what I believe. Okay, so I recently, in the last 3 months, I was writing one of the lead scholars on John Wesley, and he's a conservative scholar on John Wesley. His name's Dr. Ken Collins. I was asking him, for some feedback, basically, on the general subject. He provided me with a bibliography of information that he thought is a good list of, studies to look at when you're trying to find what John Wesley believed about end times. First on his list, or one of the very first on his list, was a source that goes back. It's from the time of about 1870s. There is a individual that liked to comment on where he thought John Wesley stood, and his name was Nathaniel West, and he wrote John Wesley a premillennialist, something along that lines, very, very close to the title. And the point of it was he gathers together all the information basically surrounding John Wesley. What did his brother believe? What did his father believe? What did the people that had major influence on his conversion experience believe about end times? What did the Moravians that he traveled to America and back, what did they believe on end times. And of course, in the midst of it, he brings up our person we're wanting to know about, which was Johann Bengel. And in that source, years ago when I was first studying it and reading it, and guys, you can access that source online very simply, okay, and it's free, okay. But in that source, he says that Johann Bengel was considered in his own day the father of, you'd be shocked, premillennialism. Okay, now how could he be called the father of premillennialism? And today, the author I brought up to you earlier, Mark K. Olson, would say that no, he was a postmillennialist. And if you go into the general studies today, the feel you get when you're going across the Wesley studies is that a lot of them would say that he was a postmillennialist. Well, so the major question again is, what did Johann Bengel believe about end times? Was he a premillennialist or was he a postmillennialist? Okay, and the evidence has clearly brought me to understand and believe that he was a premillennialist. And if it's true what I said at the beginning, that every book that intros this subject, including the one I brought up to you, starts off the subject by saying that John Wesley followed, sometimes it says to every point, that the teaching of John Bengel, then that is a major answer or a point that we need to discuss when it comes to figuring out what John Wesley believed himself about end times. If John Wesley followed him, even to the umpteenth degree, and he was a premillennialist, then it definitely suggests to me that John Wesley was a premillennialist. Okay, and but it's interesting that there could be such a difference of opinion, okay, among scholars, and so we'll go into that in another time. But I want to point out to you some of those pieces of evidence as they become available